Welcome to Mind the Gap by Freshchat, a podcast where experts and hustlers share their stories on growth, marketing, and customer experience. I'm Abhishek, and I'm your host for the day.
So when it comes to ideation for us at ChartMogul, I would love to say it's a really structured process. We've made a lot of changes in the past year or two to try and add some more structure there, but it's essentially, we run like an ideation session every couple of weeks within the marketing team where we try to encourage maybe what is kind of similar to kind of journalistic approach to like pitching stories. So we encourage people to pitch ideas for content. And when they're actually pitching that, we kind of follow something that's actually quite similar to what I used to do in a product team back when I was a product manager, which is thinking around the kind of business case for a piece of content, just as you would think around the business case of a particular feature for your software.
That was Shelley, Director of Content at ChartMogul. In the course of the podcast, we hear from Ed on what makes ChartMogul's content stand out, have the right readers, and look beyond the obvious when it comes to content. He shares with us today on the 3 crucial pillars of content: ideation, outreach, and assets. Let's start looking at ideation first. Ideation is one of the most critical steps in content creation. There is so much of content that's available out there. So how do you write the right ones? It's imperative that if you're a product company, your content solves the same problem that your product does. But is it practice? May or may not. What drives ideation?
What really drives the ideation? I'm not going to pretend that a lot of it isn't just me having ideas in the shower in the morning, because that's definitely a big part of it. And what I would say there is, to really get the ideation working, you need to just immerse yourself in the industry. This is something that's very hard at the beginning. You effectively need to plan out how you can become a thought leader in the space that you exist in. And to have any kind of meaningful voice in that space, you need to effectively build up this body of knowledge. And for me, that meant really just consuming what I considered to be the best or the most useful content in our space. And in doing that, you kind of start to form an opinion. Right. So you listen to a lot of the thought leaders and what they're saying. You start to like compare and contrast different opinions. So, this venture capitalist is saying this thing about how to measure churn in a SaaS business, for example. And then you start to see, perhaps another company says, well, okay, this is how we measure churn and this is why it's valuable to us. So then over time, and there's a lot of time involved with this, you start to form your own opinion, and that's effectively the process of you becoming a thought leader. And that actually drives a lot of the ideation side. So you start to see opportunities, you start to see trends or things that people are not currently talking about in the space, and those ideas will come to you. So that's one part of the ideation. And I would say the other part is really reflecting what's happening with our product specifically. So most of the content projects that we work on are very well aligned with the goals of our product. So we have to look at the strategic direction of ChartMogul in the next 6 to 12 months. We think about some of the kind of new features and themes that we're working on in the product and how we can really kind of inform people around this area. There's definitely a big effort to keep our content aligned with our product. And I'm a huge believer that actually our content is really just solving the same problem that our product is. And that means we look at pitch or the value of ChartMogul and we kind of ask the question, like, how do we solve this if we're not actually going to build a product? Like, let's pretend for a second we're not going to build ChartMogul. How can we still help people build a better subscription business without kind of writing code? And that can be offering people advice. It can be giving people resources. It can be in a lot of writing and thought leadership. And there's a ton of things that you can do there. So that's, I would say, like the other half of ideation for us is like, where is our product going and how do we really reinforce the messaging around that through our content?
Industry and product. That's how we bundle content ideation. Okay, we've all produced some great impressive content, but what's the whole point of content creation if we don't have enough eyes on it? What do we not know about outreach?
Distribution for us is something that's kind of an ever-changing, ever-evolving process. Like when I look at what we did for distribution at ChartMogul 2 years ago, that was a very different space. So I think a lot of our goals today are around producing content that kind of can be naturally distributed and can naturally reach its audience through mechanisms that are characteristics of the medium or the channel that it's in. So for example, with a podcast, like that has a great kind of natural mechanism for people to subscribe and for us to push content to people. I think what's changed there for us is that on the whole, we generally put less effort into what I would consider kind of the kind of growth hacks for distribution that you can read a lot about in the industry. In the early days, we were much more concerned with like obsessively sharing our content to every possibly relevant channel and getting people to engage with it there. I think nowadays we're much more optimized around actually what we publish and share and making sure that we work on the things that have like naturally high engagement with our audience. And of course, we're lucky today, like the primary difference between those early days that I was talking about and today is that we have like an owned audience and like a recurring user base that come back and consume the content that we publish today. And that gives you kind of a natural basis for distribution through, us publishing things that people want to share. So I think almost like the problem that you're solving in the early days is much tougher when you don't have this kind of owned audience. You don't have a newsletter with, more than 10,000 like engaged people that are going to consume it every week. You don't have a podcast where when you publish an episode, it automatically gets downloaded to, thousands of people's devices. These are all luxuries that you don't have in the beginning. So I think that's why the strategy for us has really changed.
In ideation lies the secret of outreach. But who owns outreach? Distribution involves a different kind of skill set compared to creative content creation. Should content creators do the outreach, or should someone else own it?
Again, from the perspective of a team that is, fairly resource constrained, like we can't put entire teams of people on these different aspects of content marketing. I think for me, there's always been a conflict in having distribution mixed with actual content production. And a lot of that is just about the kind of nature of the work that's involved. I believe that the people that produce, really high value, interesting, thoughtful, creative content, they need the space and they need the right environment to produce that. And again, a lot of that is about kind of giving people freedom for creativity. And if you look at all of the brands that you respect, perhaps in B2B SaaS, the guys that are doing an incredible job with content, I think that the difference between those and the ones that are not succeeding is that they encourage a sense of creativity in content production that the others just don't like fundamentally understand. So the kind of friction there between the distribution and the creation is that if you're asking people to go off and produce incredible work, that's kind of really kind of deep work that requires, probably multiple days, even multiple weeks of long form research and writing, in contrast to the distribution side, which is definitely not kind of a deep work. It requires like short engagements. It requires like social interaction on social media. It requires like small kind of bursts of activity, and that can be really disruptive for that creative process that I just explained. So as a single, if you assume, say that you're a small startup, you have a single content marketer, and I've seen this with companies that are trying to build out a content marketing strategy. This poor person is constantly disrupted by the fact that they need to work on distribution. They need to be kind of hustling to get their content in front of people. And that can, in many cases, completely destroy a lot of the creativity that's required to produce this thought leadership in the first place. So I think if you have the luxury to split that out, I would definitely do that to the extent that it's possible. But you need to definitely still have an understanding between the production and the distribution of, the people that are distributing your content need to understand it. They need to know the audience. They need kind of an intimate knowledge of the problem that it's solving and how they can get it in front of that audience.
People are the biggest assets for a creative content team. How do you hire such talent? In Ed's words, look beyond the obvious.
I think when you look at kind of hiring and scaling a content team, the kind of people that you should look for are perhaps not the kind of people that are instantly obvious for kind of placement in that team. And I would say the biggest example there is probably myself. Like I'm not traditionally a marketer. Like I joined ChartMogul early on from a product management role and a career that involved a period in software engineering and computer science. And I believe that kind of perspective gave me something unique, or at least an approach that was different to maybe what a kind of quote unquote classical marketer would have taken in that role. So when I look at people today, or if I look for new recruits or people to work in content marketing, actually I don't care so much about their background. I think you need to look at people that have a general curiosity in a space and kind of a passion to learn. I don't think they need to be a thought leader. They don't need to already have an opinion, but they need the ability to very quickly kind of absorb the industry and form their own opinion. So actually picking people from different disciplines, I think can really give you an edge as a team. So I would love to build like a dream content marketing team with people from like all kinds of different disciplines from a SaaS business. I would love to have somebody from a finance background writing for us at ChartMogul who has experience in the kind of financial aspect of building a business. These are all things that are kind of easy to talk about, but the difficult thing there is like a lot of these people are not looking to become content marketers, and that's always something that I think is a struggle. You need to find people that are almost not looking to be content marketers and to write, that perhaps at least have an interest and a curiosity in sharing their view with the industry. So maybe they're already blogging about a certain aspect of building a business. Maybe they're kind of sharing their thoughts through other channels, but they're probably not thinking of themselves as content marketers. And that's a really tricky one when it comes to hiring.
It's rapid fire time now. And coming up next are Ed's answers from top of his mind on finding inspiration, generally and for content.
So I'm a huge user of Feedly, and I have built up a collection of feeds in Feedly that, for me, partly out of the need to run a industry newsletter every week and to be in touch with what people are publishing, but also to kind of be able to scale my reading and to find things that are interesting. I would say so partly Feedly and partly my Twitter feed. Like I follow a lot of people there that produce really interesting content and thought leadership. And then finally, I'm a huge listener of podcasts. So I basically, anytime when my kind of brain is free, but my hands are busy, I'm listening to some podcast or another. And this informs a lot of what I think about and what I learn. I found that a number of VCs lately have really stepped up their content game. Like in SaaS, especially when I started out, it was, a few individual bloggers kind of, and they were effectively the thought leaders in SaaS and SaaS metrics. But so I'm a huge fan of First Round Capital. They produce some excellent content, and they have really started to they have a blog called First Round Review, and they have incredibly interesting content there that really takes what used to just be kind of individual venture capitalist thought leadership and turns it into much more of a structured output. So I'm always looking to them to kind of get inspiration and to understand what the VCs are thinking in this space.
In a world of diminishing creative bravery and no readers, how do you ideate and distribute content? What are your takeaways from the episode, and how do you plan to apply it in your content strategy? Tweet to us at Freshchat app. Of course, goes without saying, we would love to chat. Thank you for listening to Mind the Gap. Subscribe to our podcast at freshchat.com/mindthegap. You can check out our upcoming episodes and ask questions to our guest by sending an audio message there. If you enjoyed today's episode, share it with the world. See you guys soon.